Okay, so I'm sure some of you were expecting a trace tier list, and while that would have been funny, traces, there's like 4 options in the game right now that are legendary and non-sunset. I mean, obviously traces came out after sunsetting. So I decided, instead of kind of doing a trace tier list where all of them are S or A tier, that's not going to teach people that much. I decided to kind of discuss what each of the 4 trace rifles do, what makes them different, and why you might choose to use each of them in your day-to-day activities in Destiny 2 Endgame PvE. So let's introduce our 4 contenders. We have Acasia's Dejection from Root of Nightmares. We have Hollow Denial from Season of the Haunted. We have Path of Least Resistance from Season of the Seraph. And finally, we have Retraced Path from Dares of Eternity. All 4 of these are craftable. They all have access to craftable perks. So let's get on with it. So what is a trace rifle actually used for? Because a lot of people are very confused about that. A lot of people just ask, hey, why wouldn't I just use a primary? What's the point of a trace rifle? I've said this before, but trace rifles are basically special ammo auto rifles with higher time to empty on their mags, better damage profiles, better stats, better access to perks. Trace rifles are generally the weapon of choice when it comes to people who are quite competent at the game, who are just doing regular activities and want something like a primary to shoot buttons, shoot objectives with, whether that be you're doing a speedrun, whether that be you're using Cenotaph Mask in a GM Nightfall. There's a variety of uses for trace rifles, but basically what they are is, if you wanted to use something like an SMG, generally more competent players will tend towards using a trace rifle instead in most circumstances where you have ammo to use with that trace rifle. So first, let's talk about Acasia's Dejection from Root of Nightmares. This thing, the defining factor when it comes to Acasia's Dejection, I would say, is the perk Reconstruction. This is not available on any other perk, and for that reason, I consider Acasia's Dejection to be the best general gameplay trace in the game. Why is that? Well, I mentioned earlier that trace rifles are essentially a quality of life weapon. If you want to use an SMG, but you want longer range, similar damage profile, you want a bigger mag size, you want it to be more appropriate for, more context, more endgame oriented context, then a trace rifle is kind of like your guy. It's like a primary that's a catch-all for everything. So Reconstruction is a fantastic perk. It takes the trace rifle's already massive mag size and makes it so that you basically never have to worry about reloading. It's auto-loading holster and overflow all in one without the need for an ammo pickup. So Reconstruction is definitely what sets this thing apart from the rest. Besides that, it also does have like Frenzy, Incandescent, Paracausal Affinity, which I think is a little bit of a slept-on perk on this trace. So yeah, it has a lot of stuff that makes it feel really snappy. It's great for Empyrean extension on Solar Warlock. It also has, Incandescent to proc Singeing on certain classes. So for that reason, Acasia's Dejection can be a very, very good trace for general gameplay. It's nothing like, it doesn't have Shoot to Loot. It doesn't have that many specialized perks that are good for utility, but if you're just looking for an all-around trace that is really, really good in just like strike speed running or just doing regular stuff in a raid where you're shooting buttons, this thing is probably the best pick when it comes to that. Okay, next up we have Hollow Denial. Now, Hollow Denial, this thing's a bit niche. When it first came out, people were going crazy because this thing has, of course, Repulsor Brace, and being a trace rifle, the only Void trace rifle, and the only Void trace rifle with Repulsor Brace, it's pretty good for Void 3.0. If you're on Gerfalcons, I would say this thing is a must-have. Besides something like Harsh Language with Repulsor, this thing is absolutely fantastic. It also has Enhanced Lead from Gold, which is excellent on a trace rifle, given how great the ammo economy is on a trace rifle to begin with. So something like Lead from Gold, Repulsor Brace, even though it's very situational, you basically only use it on one subclass build in the entire game. It's still so good with that subclass. That synergy is so high that I think it is worth recommending in general for that subclass. If you're playing outside of that, I don't really think there's much of a reason for you to use Hollow Denial. Void is not really an affinity that's really sought after when it comes to general gameplay, like Solar is for Empyrean extension. So, it's just kind of like a toss-up. If you're playing Gerfalcons, you should absolutely try to get your hands on this thing. But if you're not, there's not much use for this. Okay, let's keep going. We have Path of Least Resistance. Path of Least Resistance is notable because it's the only Shoot to Loot trace available right now in Destiny 2. Retraced Path used to have Shoot to Loot on its former perk pool before they made it craftable. They took that away. So now, if you're a player that's coming into Destiny 2, you do not have a Shoot to Loot retraced. The only Shoot to Loot trace you can get in the game right now is Path of Least Resistance. Now, is this a bad thing? Well, some would argue yes, because Retraced Path has a generally better perk pool in the other column besides Shoot to Loot, but that's not to say that this thing is a lost cause. It has Shoot to Loot, right? and it also has Volt Shot, right? Most of the other perks like one for all, you're not really gonna tap 3 enemies and then kind of mow down one single enemy, so not super useful. Dragonfly is just okay. Focus Fury is kind of ridiculous on a Trace. Gut Shot, not really useful. Harmony, same thing. And then Tap is more of a PvP perk. So mostly you're just gonna be using Volt Shot. This thing has a pretty limited perk pool. I would say really the only role worth seeking on this thing is, you know, just those exact 2 perks, Shoot to Loot and Volt Shot, but they are such a good combo that you don't really need to look at any other perks. It doesn't really matter, right? So Shoot to Loot, Volt Shot, this thing handles like a dream. It's subjectively speaking, this thing has like the straightest shooting laser I've ever seen in my life. Compared to all the other Traces that seem to be shooting some sort of kind of like almost like a liquid, this thing shoots like a laser. So it definitely feels very precise. That might be placebo, but you know, that's just kind of my 2 cents on the matter. You'll see this thing being used by Cenotaph Warlocks in GM speedruns all the time. People tend to prefer this thing over Retraced Path in those environments the vast majority of the time, whether it's for accessibility reasons or for QOL reasons. But yeah, this thing feels awesome with Cenotaph, and Volt Shot's a pretty good perk, whether you're playing at a GM level or at a low tier level. It's just, you know, a little bit of chip damage that you can do to enemies. So yeah, that's pretty much it for Path of Least Resistance. And finally, we have Retraced. Now, Retraced is a bit of an anomaly because, like I said, it has 2 versions. You have the old version with Shoot to Loot, and then you have, and of course, Disruption Break, I guess you should mention that as well. And then you have the new version with stuff like Adaptive Munitions. So I'm mostly going to be talking about the new version because, like I said, if you're a new player and you're kind of approaching this guide and you're looking for, hey, you know, what should I use a Trace Rifle for? Or like, what Trace Rifle should I go after? You're not going to be able to get Shoot to Loot, right? So what does this thing offer in Shoot to Loot stead? Well, you know, not much. Looking at the first column, you don't really have anything notable besides maybe Adaptive Munitions. Something people don't know about Adaptive Munitions is that not only does it, you know, break non-matching elemental shields more quickly, that's not really that important. The main thing is that ever since ever since Radiant became anti-barrier, Trace Rifles can pretty much have anti-barrier all the time, right? Whether you're in a well, whether you're using, you know, Radiant Melee and extending that using Empyrean, Trace Rifles with anti-barrier scale incredibly quickly with Adaptive Munitions. Adaptive Munitions is a perk that scales per hit. Trace Rifles have an extremely fast fire rate, and they scale up to a 600% bonus when it comes to damage against unmatching shields, and that includes barrier champions. So Adaptive Munitions, I know this is very niche, but these things, if you've ever tried to use an Adaptive Munitions Trace with Radiant on a GM barrier champion, that thing falls over in like half a second. It's like faster than Arbalest. So I thought I'd mention that because I don't see most people doing this. You know, if you don't want to use Arbalest and you have consistent access to Radiant, if you're on like Titan or something with hammers, this thing's a pretty decent option. Besides that, I mean, we have like Demo, we have Incandescent, we have Frenzy, and we have Tricorn. Out of all these perks on the right column, I would say mostly, you know, Incandescent and Frenzy, maybe Demo are the ones that you're looking for. Having a Demo Trace can be kind of useful for Verity's Brow stuff, but again, pretty situational, just like the rest of this Trace is. Most people think that Acasia has largely subsumed the role of Retraced Path, and I would agree with them. You know, if you have an old Retrace with like Shoot to Loot, Frenzy, Shoot to Loot Demo, that thing is absolutely insane. It's an absolute beast, probably the best Trace in the game. But unfortunately, can't get it anymore, so you're gonna have to settle with like Adaptive Frenzy or Adaptive Demo on this thing. I think when I recrafted mine, I put Adaptive Demo on it, and I use it occasionally in like Val speedruns, but besides that, you know, you're usually going to be using Acasia or Path, most likely even Path in general. So with that being said, that's what all 4 of the Traces are typically used for in Destiny 2 Endgame PvE right now. So, you know, how would I rank them if I had to? In my opinion, viability wise, we have Old Retraced. Old Retraced, you know, has Shoot to Loot and has a bunch of good perks in the right side. So if you have an Old Retrace with Shoot to Loot and like Frenzy or Demo, that's probably what I'd go to first. Then second, I would say Path of Least Resistance is generally the most applicable Trace Rifle when it comes to endgame PvE. Specifically, it's so good with Cenotaph because of Shoot to Loot. And besides that, it's the thing about Trace Rifles is that while I did say that Acasia's Dejection has better quality of life and general feel when it comes to just, you know, running around and shooting things with essentially an SMG, that's not that important because Trace Rifles in general have extremely good handling, extremely good reload, extremely long time to empty, and very big mag sizes. So because of that, even if you don't have something like Reconstruction or a QOL perk like Frenzy, Path of Least Resistance still feels really good and still feels like it has very high uptime. So the upside of having a perk like Shoot to Loot kind of offsets the upside of having a quality of life perk like Reconstruction on Acasia's Dejection. That being said, after Path, I would say Acasia is probably up next in my ranking. And then Hollow and Retraced are kind of tied for me. They're both kind of situational. You have Retraced with Incandescent, Demo, Frenzy, and Adaptive Munitions. And then of course you have Hollow with that perfect Lead from Gold repulsor roll for, you know, Void 3.0 hunters. So yeah, that's pretty much my my two. That's probably a lot more than two. My $50 on the matter. Yeah, I mean, trace rifles are really cool. They're very near and dear to my heart. When I made the double special video, a lot of people were asking me, hey, you know, why do I see you using trace rifles all the time? I was a day one trace rifle lover, right? And I've loved trace rifles for a long time. And I hope this video kind of explains what each trace rifle does, what their wheelhouses are. And yeah, next video, we're going to talk about probably glaives. Yeah, we're going to talk about glaives. That's gonna be a little bit interesting. Probably the special weapon I know the least about, but I'm gonna have some fun doing some research comparing them. So yeah, I'll see you guys then.